That's unavailable. Yeah. Floors refinished. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
Okay, good morning and welcome to docket number 17-1203-RE11. We're here this morning for a late file exhibit hearing in the matter of reconsidering the low income discount rate design. We have an agenda in front of us today, a panel first up from the avant-garde companies. Are there administrative matters besides swearing in witnesses and adopting LFEs? Any administrative matters? Okay. If not, let's get straight into it. I believe these witnesses have been sworn. Is that correct, Attorney Sutter?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, thank you. If you could walk them through the adoption of the late filed exhibit, please.
And good morning, Ms. Wasselneck and Ms. Rosso. As a part of your preparation for today's hearing, did you co-sponsor or sponsor responses to the late filed exhibit prompts? And do you have any changes, revisions, or additions to those responses? And do you adopt those responses as your sworn testimony here today?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any direct?
No.
Very good. Then we will begin with cross-examination by authority staff. Ms. Vigrass, please.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. So first, I wanted to start with the company's late filed exhibit number 26. So in this response, the company discussed the January 16th, 2023 compliance filing, which discussed the cost estimate of implementing additional low-income discount rate tiers. And first, can the company expand a little bit further on its response in this late filed exhibit? So the company had explained that the compliance filing considered the cost of implementing additional LiDAR tiers, within the system's rate structure, the $129,000 cost per tier, the assumptions that were included in this estimate. So I was just wondering if you could provide a little bit more detail on this late filed exhibit response.
Here we go. So when we were designing the LIDR initially, we had made a space for a third tier. Our assumption at the time was that we were going to maybe decide on that tier while we were designing LIDR at that time. And then we would have incorporated it in all of our testing, everything that we were doing at that time. Since it didn't happen during that time, now to do it, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, we have to, put whatever percentage in. We have to test it all. We have to test it all with everything, all of our plans, all of our rates. So everything has to be done all over again. Basically, what we did initially to create the LIDR to begin with, we are now going to repeat.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So in the final decision in 171203 RE11 that established the low-income discount rate, the authority directed the company to provide in that compliance filing a detailed cost estimate that shall include the cost to configure the company's system so as to accommodate the inclusion of an additional 1 or more tiers in the future.
Mhm.
So can you explain, in relation to your response in late filed exhibit 26, how the company's cost estimate complied with the authority's directive?
So like I said, we made a space for it, but not knowing what it is, you can't test, you can't do anything because you don't know what that percentage is. We could have assumed one and done some testing, but we would have had to do that testing all over again when that percentage was announced. Whatever those things were, you have to test everything all over again to make sure everything calculates out right. So like I said, the estimate was at the time, if we were going to do it while we were creating LIDR, that's what the cost would have been while we were already doing it. But now that it's all done, well, mostly it's done. Now to do it again is, like I said, it's like a whole new project and it's like doing it all over again.
Right, okay, thank you. So moving now to the company's late filed exhibit 27, which I think, so the company provided a revised late filed exhibit 27 yesterday, and I think we're going to, sure, bring it up on the screen just for stakeholders to review. Could the company walk us through the revised filing that the company filed yesterday? and specifically point out any differences between this filing and the original late filed Exhibit 27 filing?
We're looking at attachment 1, correct?
Yes.
It's much harder to see on this little screen. So this is taking in account the DSS data that they had shared with us and how many customers that they show in our territory that are on DSS. So we took their information as well as, because they didn't account for SEEP really. So we added in what customers we know that we have that are SEEP customers into this to show what the costs could possibly be based on the DSS information and our SEEP customers.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And then also you can see to the right, it's the breakdown of how many customers would fall into each tier, depending on whether it's a 3, 4, or 5 tier plan.
Right, thank you. And so these estimate or the calculations of number of customers per tier, are these all of the financial hardship customers or only the DSS identified customers and the SEEP customers?
Correct.
Only DSS and SEEP.
Okay, thank you. And does the company know how many customers are missing from this estimate?
Yes.
An approximate.
Approximately. Yep, approximately 30,000.
Okay. And so those 30,000 customers, can you explain why they're financial hardship customers but have not been captured by DSS or SEEP?
Well, we have customers that self-declare with their finances and maybe they don't apply for any other programs. There's also customers that are coded hardship, but they receive SEEP, but from another source like wood, oil, gas. So those customers, they're not receiving SEEP. So we can't identify them as SEEP necessarily, but they're getting the discount because they are getting the program on another source. So we know those are the ones that we believe that they are. And we've been talking about how to, going forward, depending on what is decided here with, how many tiers, that in doing this, we're going to also make system changes so that we can better identify those self-declared. Because right now, we know that they were self-declared, but we don't know, even though we've stored their, documentation on their account, we don't have it stored in our system to say that they're the 60% or, where they are in the level of income. So going forward, that's something we're going to look at so that when they are self-declared, we can say, okay, they were self-declared, say tier 1 because their income was between this and this, so that we can report on and know how many customers fall into that.
Thank you for that. And is that system configuration to identify customers that are self-identified, is that part of the plan that the company has proposed?
No, because we just realized that when we got the DSS information, when we started to break it down, we went, oh, wait a minute, we're missing almost half of our customers. Why is that? And so we started to brainstorm around why that is. And we we're like, oh, well, there's this, so.
Okay, thank you. And so to clarify, so that those 30,000 customers that have not been identified by DSS, do you know what proportion of that amount of customers are attributable to the various reasons that you outlined? So, this amount of customers are, I don't know, receiving SEEP for,
No.
well,
No, we
okay.
don't know. That's what I said, when we got this information, we started to brainstorm around that going, we had no idea there was going to be this gap. And some of it too is going to be, there's going to be some customers that that are on because they were on a DSS program, and when we recertify, those will fall off. So there is that difference too, but we don't think that's a huge amount of that difference.
Right. Okay, great. And so with those 30,000 customers, do you have an understanding of what tier they're on for the discount rate?
No, because like I said, we don't store what like their income level is. And that's something that we're gonna have to look at doing, because when they're coded based on where their income is to whatever level, whether it's 1 or 2 right now, but it's not stored in the system that way. We don't know where they were income wise. So that's where we're gonna have to come up with a way to identify that, whether it's a checkoff, or a different code, so that we will know that this customer is in tier 1 because their income is the 60% below it.
Yeah, so
medium.
basically, John Smith sent in his financials.
Mhm.
We know that he qualifies for tier 1 or tier 2, but we have nothing in our system that's going to say he submitted
Hmm.
his 4 pay stubs for the last month. We just know that the documentation we received did qualify him,
Okay,
but we have no way to go back and query our system on what did he submit that qualified him for that.
okay, thank you. So to clarify, so you can look at a customer's account and see that they're on tier 1 or tier 2?
Yes.
But you don't necessarily know what income information the customer provided to verify their eligibility.
Correct.
So, are you able to see these 30,000 customers are made up of this amount of tier 1 versus this amount of tier 2 customers?
We probably could go back and pull that.
Okay.
It would take a little bit of comparisons to make sure that,
Not overlapping.
yeah, exactly. We're not crossing over. We want to make sure that
Right.
this customer wasn't also included on the DSS file. So there would be,
Mhm. Right. And to confirm, so the 30,000 customers, those are customers that were enrolled prior to the DSS data sharing agreement
Not
with LiDAR?
necessarily, because they could have been enrolled because they self-declare.
Right.
They're not on like I said, they're not on a program, but they self-declared and their financials showed that they, would be on a discount. And or like I said, the customers that are, they heat with oil maybe, or they heat with gas or wood, those customers, we get a file from the agencies telling us so that they do qualify for the hardship. However, they don't get SEEP, so they don't, they don't get DSS or any program, so they're not quantified there.
Right. So the information that you received from DSS to enroll customers onto the discount rate, that those 30,000 customers were not enrolled through that process, just to want to confirm.
Well,
correct.
well, I mean, there could be some that were, but now aren't on DSS anymore. That's the part we don't know, we have no way of knowing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So but like I said, we don't think that's a big amount,
Mhm.
but we honestly don't have any way of knowing that. Just educated guess, I guess, is that it
Right.
probably isn't that many.
Okay, great. I appreciate that. Thank you. So, in the revised filing, the company stated that it was able to identify about 1,000 electric customers that receive level 1 SEEP benefits. Can you describe how you were able to identify these customers?
SEEP level 1 last season. So we used the 23-24 season data. A level 1 recipient had an award between 480 and 530, I believe was so we queried the system for the accounts that were coded via a CAA, a community action agency, or a SEEP file to us with that award amount. And that's how we came up with that number.
Perfect. Thank you. And so using the level 1 SEEP as the eligibility for tier 4, did the company consider using a different benefit program or a different income guideline for tier 4 of the low income discount rate?
No, because we were going off of DSS's analysis, and they had, in their analysis that they had done, they had left tier 4 blank with no quantity of customers in there, stating that those would be SEEP level 1 customers. So that's what we based our analysis, our further analysis on.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And so given that DSS data sharing itself, my understanding is that it does not include information on customers that receive SEEP or the level of SEEP benefit that they're receiving. Does the company have a position on whether using SEEP as a qualifying or eligible benefit for the discount rate is appropriate or efficient?
I would, yeah, I mean, we don't have any reason not to accept the SEEP levels as a
Mhm.
qualifier.
Right. Okay. And so specifically, does the company receive the SEEP information either through the customer themselves or through the community action agencies? In other words, if a customer were to enroll on tier 4 of the discount rate, what are the kind of enrollment pathways for that customer?
The first and I guess main pathway would be the community action agency sending us a commitment file. And that commitment file would list the customer, and it would also list their reward amount. So that would enable us to qualify them in the various tiers.
Okay.
The community action agency could also enroll a customer through the portal, our portal.
Mhm.
And it would be the same thing. Once they enter the award the customer is receiving, when that gets fed into our system, that would trigger what level they would receive.
Okay.
And if by chance there was a delay in us receiving the files from the CAA, a customer could send us a copy of their award letter.
Mhm.
And obviously the award letter is going to tell us the amount that they're receiving, and then that we could manually code the customer in the various tier.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And so moving to, I believe, attachment 2 of late filed exhibit 27. I just wanted to check in on the analyses that were conducted. So I just wanted to make sure, did these analyses take into account the usage cap?
Yeah, this is the original. Yeah,
I believe, yes, there is a
Yes.
usage cap.
Denoted.
For example, we're just looking at page 5.
Mhm.
And if you scroll towards the right, you would see
LIDR.
LIDR usage cap. And there's a percentage. Column I. You can see where it says,
Right.
so,
Plus LIDR.
yeah, 19.4% capped with using 2021's usage was what was done.
Great, thank you. So can you tell me a little bit about how that number was calculated and what specifically that's reflecting?
We are not the numbers people. This was prepared by Mark Polka. We could have him, answer, late file on exactly how he does this.
Mhm.
Because
Yeah, he's our rates
He's-
person.
he's the numbers person.
Sure. Right. So would it be possible to have a read-in during this hearing to provide some information on how that number was calculated?
No, he's,
Mark Coco's on medical leave, and his supervisor, Mark Marini, I don't believe is available for a read-in.
Okay.
Attorney Sutter, do we know how soon after today that one of them could provide the information?
Certainly, Mr. Marini could review and provide a response. And within the current docket schedule. I can't answer specifically for Mr. Marini, but he could give his attention to this.
Okay. All right, I think we're gonna end up asking that you supplement the late file with that answer. Preferably by next Wednesday, which is the 11th. Do we need any clarification or a repeat of what staff is looking for?
If you could, please, so that we can relay
Sure.
exactly what you're looking for.
So the 19.4% that was calculated for the LiDAR usage cap, how that number was calculated and what exactly it is reflecting.
Okay.
Great, thank you. And so I believe in attachment 3 of this late filed exhibit, the company provided a 15-month implementation timeline for adding an additional tier. So my understanding is that is it essentially 12 months to actually develop and implement the low income discount, the additional tier, and then an additional 3 months post launch to provide support. So theoretically, if the authority approved a modification to the discount rate in, let's say, October, would the company be able to launch the modified discount rate by November of 2025?
yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's, ours is a little slow in
Yeah,
opening.
opening here.
I think so, because the last 3 months are post go live
Live
support, and
So
so
yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And then staying with this attachment, there are very slight cost differences between creating 1, 2, or 3 additional tiers. Can you explain a little bit further what those cost differences are?
Just oh geez, I just got kicked out, but anyway, because we're gonna be in there testing, so it doesn't matter if we do a third, a fourth, or a fifth, we can test all those all at the same time. So it's just the additional programming for whether it's a 1, a 2, or a 3. So if it's only 1, we have the 1 cost. If it's a fourth one, then it's another 129, I think. So it's just the actual IT programming piece because the testing piece is the same because we can test them all together at the same time.
Okay, perfect, thank you. All right, and so given that there was a recent authority guidance given that approved ceasing the bill forgiveness program this November, will the implementation costs for potentially adding additional tiers change with that adjustment?
No, because there's, so implementing an additional tier would not be affected at all with whether bill forgiveness is
Deactivated.
deactivated or remains. There's
Mhm.
no interaction between those two from a programming standpoint, programming cost standpoint.
Might shorten testing a little. We won't have to test the bill forgiveness program. We only have to test
Right.
MPP.
Okay,
And budgets and so on, but there would be one less test we'd have to do, yes.
right. Thank you. And for these, the phases that are presented on the screen now, is it possible for any of these phases to occur simultaneously? So in other words, is it possible for the external vendor to perform some tasks at the same time that internal staff are able to work on various tasks?
Internal staff is mainly doing testing, and they unfortunately can't do the testing until the programming pieces have been completed.
Mhm.
The only time they would overlap was if during a testing, we uncovered an issue and then sent that back to IT to correct. We could continue testing some other pieces
Mhm.
while they're trying to correct what we may have uncovered. But in general, IT has to finish theirs before internal could move on with their piece.
During, and when we're doing the exploring phase and the build phase, we are involved. So it's a joint because they don't know the business. They just know what we're telling them we need to have programmed. And then there's times where they say, well, we can't do that, but we can do understand what we're looking for or what we're trying to get to. So that's simultaneous. It's just when it comes to the testing that, yeah, they're working on a piece to fix things as we're testing them. So
Right.
that's really the only time where we can be doing something while they're doing something else.
Okay, thank you. So now moving to the company's late file exhibit 29. In that response, the company stated that modifying the tier 2 percentage discount is relatively simple. Is that the same if the company were to change the eligibility requirements for, let's say, tier 2?
I guess I don't understand.
So, so my understanding is that the company suggested adjusting the percentage discount of the tier 2 from 50% to
Yes.
40% and said that that change will be relatively simple.
Mhm.
So let's say, for example, the tier 1 eligibility requirement is 60% state median income. If the company were to change that eligibility requirement to 100% federal poverty level, would that also be a relatively simple adjustment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And so, what is required for the company to modify the eligibility requirements for the tiers?
We'd have to work with our various partners, DSS, community action agencies, so that everyone is on board and understanding what qualifiers are now tier 1 and what qualifiers are tier 2.
Hmm.
Training
our own
of,
staff.
of our staff,
Right.
Own
so
staff,
that they understand what now.
correspondence, all of the information that we send out that tells people what qualifies, that would all have to be changed and updated.
Thank you. And so for the actual system modifications, what would be required to make that change in your IT system?
We'd just be changing the amount.
Probably just the percentage, but again, we're not the IT experts, but
Okay.
I believe most everything comes to us with a flag that says this is tier 1, this is tier 2.
Hmm.
So that's not going to change. It's just the percentage within the system calculating the tier is what
Okay.
would mainly change.
Well, if we were changing the tier, but if we're just
Right.
changing the qualification piece, it's really the outside, the SEEP, the DSS, all of those would have to change what they're telling us.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And so in that same response, it says that the cost to complete all system testing is about $65,000 and will require 5 weeks or 1,204 hours. Can you explain where that is reflected in the chart provided in the slate file exhibit?
There is, which number? What?
So it said that the system testing component will require 5 weeks or 1,204 hours. But when you look at the chart and you add up the first 5 weeks of hours, it equates to 908 hours. So I was wondering if the company could clarify where that is reflected in the chart, the 1,204 hours for testing.
Well, it's kind of divvied up really between your deployment, your unit testing, deployment testing, user acceptance testing. Because like I said, when we're testing, there's still other things going on while we're testing. So it's those costs are a piece of each one of those.
Okay, thank you. So the system testing, the user acceptance testing was included in that.
Yeah, it looks like,
Yes.
yeah, the three, the
Yep.
unit testing, the development, and the user acceptance would come out to the 1204.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And finally, looking at the late filed exhibit 32. In attachment 1, it is showing the actual internal and external labor costs associated with the low income discount rate. So there are costs for both internal and external labor between January and July of 2024. Can you explain what those costs are associated with?
So we have been still testing when, things are like broken. We've still had to fix them. In fact, just yesterday, I believe, we closed out the LIDR project. So up until now, we've been fixing glitches, fixing things that you just don't know are going to happen. Especially a lot of it was around the supplier because that kind of came in late in the planning of it. So that really threw a lot of different things off. And so that was still being worked on during this whole time. So we just completed the project. Like I said, yesterday was our final meeting and said, okay, we're done.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Chairman, those are the end of my questions.
Thank you. That brings us to the OCC, please. Thank you. Attorney White.
Hi, Kim White with OCC. So I'm going to go back. I apologize. I got a little bit lost in some of the initial questions with authority staff regarding the new LFE 27 that was filed yesterday and your discussion about the 30,000 customers. So if I'm repeating things, I apologize, but I'm just trying to clarify it for myself. In what DSS provided earlier in the week, for Avangrid, they identified 27,146 customers. Now, so I guess in your LFE that you filed, you had 30,099 customers. So first off, what's the difference between the 27 and the 30,000?
The 963, the SEEP, the number of customers that had actually received SEEP, we added in as tier 4,
Because
Okay,
they-
so roughly 3,000
roughly,
people.
yes,
because we added in tier SEEP level 1 as tier 4. And then we also took SEEP customers level 2 and 3 and added those in on tier 1 and 2, because that's where those customers would qualify. So that we incorporated the number of SEEP customers that we were aware of.
Okay, and you have a way of knowing that these customers weren't in the DSS numbers.
they have no way of qualifying SEEP. So could there be some overlap? Sure. Because we don't know, because DSS doesn't know who's on SEEP. And SEEP wise, we don't know who's on DSS.
Okay, so the additional
There could
3,000
be.
people could have already been in there.
Could have.
Could have.
Okay, so then the next part is where I got particularly lost. Are you saying that there is an additional 30,000 customers other than the 30,000 you have here that are not reflected anywhere in any of this?
Correct.
Okay, so you're saying that's 30,000 people that are not known to DSS that don't receive a DSS benefit.
Well, they may have and don't any longer. So maybe when they got coded in our system, they did, like say 6 months ago, they did have DSS, now they're not. So DSS number, that's gonna fluctuate. So there's those, but then there's also our customers that self-declare that we've coded because they provided their income and they're not on any kind of DSS program. And also maybe are not on any kind of SEEP, or we weren't notified that they're getting, SEEP from some other way or assistance some other way, like because they heat with wood or whatever that is. So we have all those customers as well.
Okay, so your system is able on the back end to look and be able to say, okay, this one set of 30,000 customers or 27,000 are told to us by DSS. And then we've got these other 30,000 folks over here who DSS did not provide us any information on them. We guarantee that they came to us of their own means in some other way.
Or like I said, they were on DSS and now no longer are. And that's why they're not in the DSS numbers, but of course we still have them coded because we don't know, we've said that if they fall off, that we're not going to downgrade them, that during the recertification period is when those customers would drop off.
Do you have any idea how many customers fall into that category?
We would have no idea. We'll find out when recertification comes.
Okay. Okay, turning to the LFE, the revised LFE 2 that was submitted yesterday.
27?
I'm sorry, LFE 27, attachment 2. I apologize. I missed. Just want to make sure. So completely for ease, I am on page 16 because it happens to be the first one with 5 tiers.
Okay, hang on, let's get,
But I think my question's probably up.
page 16, you said.
It's at the bottom, it says P16 of 24, 5 tier, 15, 25, 35. I think it might.
Okay,
got it.
Okay. So just for my own understanding of, your exhibit here. So it's, I'm going to call it dynamic in the sense that row 16, if I were to go into cell F16 and type any different number into that cell, it's going to change all of my inputs the whole way down.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And also the, in row 12 of that one, but I think, once again, I think my questions apply to each of the tabs. I'm just using this one as an example. The all-in rate that you gave on line 12, is that the current all-in rate, or did you update that with this exhibit?
That where we're looking at, it's 0.3056. I want to make sure I'm looking at the right line.
Yes, ma'am.
No, we did not adjust that.
We did not change that. So, what he has that labeled as 2024 all in
With supply.
with supply. So, I'm again, because that's more on the pricing side. All we can say is going by the label 2024. I'm not,
We didn't change it.
we didn't change it, so it may be January 2024 rate versus July.
Okay. And also, and I guess I don't know if you'll know the answer to this either, but if you look at cell D24, it's the monthly average customer's bill, the 242.88.
Mhm.
And I guess I was just going to clarify, I think the way that was calculated was using the billed revenue, which is D29 divided by the number of customers, which is D19, and then annualized. Does
So it
that
looks
seem to
like-
make sense?
They use residential rate, because at the bottom
Yeah.
of that, residential rate customer using 700 kilowatt hours, standard service using January 1st, 24 rates.
So
That's
if
how
I
it's calculated.
multiply 700 times,
Maybe it was
The rate.
the rate, maybe it's that 30 cents up above. Does that come in?
Other things, I would think.
yeah, I don't get that number. Is the reason why I was
Okay,
wondering
okay,
how
yeah.
you calculated.
So
it, and I-
again, we didn't,
Yeah, it's gonna be everything that has to do, because there's more things in a bill than just your usage, right? You have your other charges, your supply charges, so he took a customer, an R-rate customer using 700 kilowatt hours by what the rate was on January 1 to come up with what the average low-income low-income discount rate bill would be.
so yeah, so unfortunately, we don't know what else is feeding into that calculation.
Okay. I'll turn it up.
Morning, Tom Wheel, the Office of Consumer Counsel. I have some, I'm going to start with late file 26. And I think Ms. Vigrass was asking some similar questions, but these are hopefully non-duplicative. So this, there's an explanation in the testimony that there was a third tier cost estimated for $1.2 million with a 15-month timeline. And the point of this late file was asking to compare that with the $129,000 estimate. And I guess I understand this response to be saying that the compliance filing, that $129,000 estimate wasn't considering some additional costs. Is that accurate?
Well, it wasn't considering us doing it outside of the initial project.
Okay. So I think that's what I heard with Ms. Vigrath earlier too. So the $129,000 estimate then was based on, was the estimate at the time of, was the idea basically if we wanted to add tiers while we're constructing the entire LiDAR system, it would be 129,000 per additional tier?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And that the initial estimate in that January 2023 compliance filing for $129,000, it looked like that was just based on hours. It was a 22,129 hour estimate. Is that correct?
Because really, since we were testing everything anyway, the only cost would have been the IT part of it to put it into, to calculate into the system. And then testing, we would have tested it right along with the other 2 tiers. So it'd be 3 tiers. So it'd all be, about the same.
Okay. Thanks. And I'm actually, I don't know if you have that compliance filing in front of you from January. It's that $129,000 estimate is based on, it's in a row labeled additional tiers at 20% of low range, but it's in this overall box called total implementation costs, which includes external and internal costs.
Mhm.
And I was just trying to figure out like the breakdown of looking at those costs, the internal, the hourly rate, as I understand it, from the $129,000, if you divide 129,000 by 2129, you get about $60.60. And I couldn't figure out like how that compared to the other costs here, because it looked like the external costs were derived at a rate of like an hourly rate of $45.75. Sorry, that was internal. And external would be $88.65. So I'm just curious, like why there's a different price on that additional tier labor.
Well, because for the most, like I said, for the tier to create that 3rd tier, it's mostly external. Because external would work on that. And then when it was given to us, we'd be testing it right along with everything else.
So is it kind of a mix? Because like I just said, external, as I
Yeah.
understand it, is like
Yeah.
about $90 an hour,
Yep.
and internal's
It can
lower.
be
So it's a,
mixed,
Yeah, because we're gonna have to, there's a little additional testing because you have an additional rate to test, but it's not significant as compared to, the cost for the outside, the IT people to actually create it and to do it.
okay. And do you know if that mix was created? Because I thought maybe it was a mix. I averaged the 2 hourly rates. It's not exactly $60.60. Is it like a breakdown? Are some of those estimated hours?
Mhm.
And do you know what that breakdown was? Like which of the 2,129 hours would have been internal versus external?
No, I don't remember.
Okay. Thank you. I'm looking at now late file 27. And the narrative response, I think.
The one submitted last night?
No, sorry, this is the August 5th.
Oh, 27.
Okay. Okay.
My first question, there we go. So the answer, I'm looking at the second page, and there's like numbered answers. And this is just for the record, I think I'm not actually confused by this, but for number 3, it says, please see late file 24 UI attachment 3. That's supposed to say UI 27 attachment 3. Is that correct?
Probably, yes, it looks like that is a typo.
Okay. And so I guess the reason I needed to ask that is my next question is about late file 27 attachment 3, also filed on that same date. So the older version. And there's hold on, now I've lost that attachment. Just a second. Oh, thank you. Yeah, at the very top, there's the estimate of actual LiDAR implementation costs with the total cost of around 1.2 million. It says $1,199,999. And I noticed, I guess I was just confused, and maybe Ms. Vigrass was actually asking this also. That number, the total cost number, doesn't appear to change from one tab to the next, but the actual, like if you scroll down and compare the internal versus external costs and the totals that are kind of in yellow on those tabs, those do grow from one tab to the next. So I was just confused. Do you know why the total implementation cost doesn't seem to change?
This is, I believe it's a total of the three, correct?
And subject to check for clarification, that top number, that 1.2 million, I believe is what was already expended in 2023 and 24. And then
This is new cost.
the bottom half is new
Right.
costs
That's what
to
the cost,
implement those additional tiers.
that's what the cost was
Gotcha. Okay.
original.
So the way to look at this then would be to, like, if this is proposing, and I understand this exhibit's been updated but the way to look at this would be to take that 1.2 million and then these options to make these adjustments would be 1.2 million plus the total of the two.
To get the
External.
total project cost.
Correct.
Yes.
Gotcha. Thank you. Late file 28. That, the 97,800 total, is that external or internal or a mix of external and internal IT?
That bigger?
I'm gonna make it bigger, sorry. Everything. That's the total, the 97,800 is a total of all of those 11 weeks of hours.
Yeah, thanks. I was just trying to figure out, I've been trying to track, like we were talking about with my first set of questions, that there's a pretty substantial difference in hourly cost between internal and external. So I was trying to figure out, like, I see the subtotals with hours here. I was just trying to figure out if this was a mix or if there was any breakdown.
Yeah, so the 9 through 11, user acceptance testing, that would be internal costs. Because that would be the business testing.
But still could have the IT too, because we still have IT working with us. So it's really, all of it's a mix.
Okay.
Because when we were exploring, we're telling the IT people what we want. And then as they're building it, they're building it and coming back to us and saying, okay, we can't do that, but we can do this, or we don't understand what you were talking about. And then developing, same thing, it's hand in hand. And then testing is mostly internal, but as we find things are wrong, then you have to go back to the external and the IT people and get whatever it is fixed. If it's not working like you expected it to.
Okay, thanks. So using testing as an example, the estimate there is 480 hours. So some of that, it sounds like most of that maybe would be internal, but some amount of those hours would be external. Is that accurate?
Yes, yes.
And
yeah.
do you know what that mix is for all of these subsections?
I mean, it's a guess, right? Because you don't know what if you're gonna run into problems or not. You may not, which is unlikely, but you may not run into too many, so it could end up being less. This is an estimate. Everything could end up being less than what we think and or more, but we usually try to, I think, account for unexpected things. It's better to say it's 97 and come in at 120 versus come in at 87, so.
Yeah, thanks. I understand that. I was just trying to figure out, I mean, with the understanding that it's an estimate, at some point, someone said that'll be 480 hours, which is equivalent to $40,800. So I'm just trying to figure out like how that number, like how the price relates to the hours. And it sounds from your previous responses like it's based on an hourly rate for external versus internal, and it's sort of a mix of hours. So I'm just trying to figure out, just trying to track the logic of how the hours were split up.
It's an estimate, educated guess on how long it's going to take to test. Looking at all the items that we have to test and giving an estimate to each item that we're going to test, how long that test takes, regression testing, and then accounting for everything's not going to be perfect and you're going to have to go back to the external to have it fixed.
Okay. Thanks. My other question about this exhibit is, I want to ask you to speak for Eversource, but I noticed Eversource was asked the same question essentially for late file 37. This question about a timeline for dropping a customer with LiDAR. And their response to that question said that they really couldn't quantify the cost without further details about how frequently customers would be dropped. So I was just curious what assumptions UI made about that, about the frequency of dropping customers. As I understood, there was, I guess I won't ask you to speak for them or even frame it for them. I guess the issue is this based on the assumption that customers might be, like that customers could be removed from the LiDAR at any time, or a monthly adjustment? Was that considered?
Well, see, because, well, because once we have it automated and everything is automated, it doesn't really matter how many people or when, because the system is doing it. Could it be a little more if a lot of people did, so correspondence wise? But to the physical work, which of course is what costs the most money, the plan is to automate it all, so there really isn't going to be a whole lot of intervention with, by a person.
Okay. So again, with the understanding and caveat that all of this is just an estimate, but the idea is that this would be to build a system that could just do it at any time. Like
Yes.
as soon as-
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Yes.
Thank you. My last questions are about LFE 29. Can't blame my computer for these delays because I got a new computer, so my old excuse isn't going to work. Sorry. So as I read this response, there are two estimates in it, and I think Ms. Bygrass was also asking some questions about this, but I just want to make sure I understand. So there's a 4,712 estimate for 124 hours. And then there's also a $65,492 estimate for 1,204 hours. And that first estimate, as I understand it, was just for the idea was to change the rate from 50% to 40%. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then the second estimate, as I understand it, is to do the testing to evaluate the effect on the transition caused by the usage cap. Is that correct?
Oh, on all the programs. So it would be, once you change that percentage, you have to make sure the calculation is going correctly in your other programs, whether it's a budget, MPP. We wouldn't have to do BFP anymore, but just to make sure that it's calculating out right with the bills and with the supplier changes, all those things. When you change anything, you have to test everything that it affects.
Okay. Thanks. I'm looking at like I guess the third bullet in the response, but it's the second bullet in the second kind of bulleted section that says, however, it will be necessary to test and validate the resulting calculation for both tier 1 and tier 2 discounts.
Mhm.
And I guess I was looking specifically at how it seems like it says the testing is necessary to validate the resulting bills with usage above and below the usage cap are calculated correctly.
Mhm.
I guess and there's also some discussion of the usage cap issue on the first bullet on the second page. I was just confused as I understand the usage cap to use, I mean, like, without having any understanding of like the structure of your IT system, once the cap is hit, the way it's supposed to work is that the billing rate, the discount is removed, right? Like that the usage is above the cap is billed at the regular fully billed rate.
Mhm.
So what is it about changing the discount rate itself that requires any change to that kind of transition to the,
You have to make sure it calculates out when you change anything in the system, you have to regression test as well as test what you've changed. So we wouldn't be changing tier 1, but we'd still want to test it because we're in there changing something. So you'd want to test both types of bills, whether it's tier 1 or tier 2, to make sure your new percentage is calculating out correctly at your caps. And then making sure, because you made a change, that the non-cap is still calculating right. So it's just a verification to make sure that it's still doing what you think it's going to do, even though you only changed one thing. Sometimes, and we've seen it, where something, you change the one and for some reason it's something else, it all of a sudden isn't working right.
okay. Thanks. And back to the estimate just to change the discount itself. As Ms. Vigrass was asking this morning, and as it says here in the response, it sounds like it's relatively simple just to change that 50 to 40, and recognizing that in the grand scheme of what we talk about in this room, $4,000 is not a lot of money. I was still just a little surprised at the 124-hour estimate to make that change. Could you just walk me through like why that wouldn't, like how that 124-hour estimate was?
Because they'll make that change, but they also test. So they have to make sure, before they hand it over to us, they also have to test to make sure what they did from their perspective is working correctly. Because there's no sense in just changing it and giving it to us and then and us saying to them, oh, yeah, this is not working right. This is not working right. They test first. They don't test extensively like we do. They'll do a couple samples where we will do, extensive, right through all our programs, all of our things, testing the bills and so on. But they will test first.
Okay. And by they, you mean the external IT vendor?
Right, the external, yes.
And was this estimate, did the company specifically ask this vendor for this estimate to
Yes.
make this adjustment, and that was the response?
Yes.
Okay. Once, and I know I said my last questions were going to be at 29, and I just didn't have it highlighted here, as I do have one more question about LFE 32, but it's actually also kind of going back to LFE 26. So in 32, the response to 32 says that because additional tiers would require repeating all of the work that had already been completed to implement the LiDAR, that's the reason for the additional cost for each tier. But as we just discussed earlier, LFE 26 says that the cost for each tier was considered with the assumption that the additional tiers would be implemented in conjunction with the LiDAR implementation project, not as a separate practice, a separate project. I kind of kept bouncing back and forth between these responses because it seemed like they were saying the opposite things. Like it seemed like 32 was saying the reason for the cost is because everything that's already been done has to be done again. But 26 is saying, well, that cost was with the expectation that it would all be done at the same time. Can you?
Also, the original 129 was because we thought we'd be doing it at the same time as when we were working on LIDR to begin with. And now that that project is closed and we're going to work on possibly 1, 2, or 3 more tiers, that's why there's such a cost difference, because now this is a new project. And if we could have done it when we were doing the project initially, we would have tested it and done it in conjunction all at the same time. So now adding another tier, we have to test everything all over again. Anything that we're not changing, we have to test to make sure it didn't get changed or nothing's wrong with it. And then test everything that is going to be affected by the change, whether it's 1 tier, 2 tier, or 3 more tiers, we have to test them all.
Okay. I guess I understand that. I guess I'm just getting a little hung up on this response in particular because the response was asking for backup for cost estimates in OCC 41 and OCC 40, which as I understand it were based on that $129 estimate. So it seems like I'm reading this response to say that the $129 estimate is because adding additional tiers would require repeating all of the work that had already been done. And this response also on the second paragraph references that $129 cost. So do you understand my confusion? It sounds like this is saying it will cost, this is still saying it'll cost $129,000 for each additional tier.
It's not really the way I read it, but I can understand where but what we were trying to say, I guess, is that if we had done this during the initial project while we were working on LEDR, the additional cost would have only been the 129. But now that that project is closed and we'd start a new one, that's why there's this additional cost, because everything has to be redone.
Okay. Thank you. So this is referring to the additional costs that are laid out in, I think it's late file 27 that we discussed
Correct.
earlier. Okay,
Yes.
gotcha. Thank you. That's our final question.
Thank you. Attorney Nigro. Thank you. Attorney O'Hare. Thank you. Attorney Wyman. No questions. Okay, thank you. Attorney Roswick. Okay.
Good morning.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Attorney Roswick, can you just direct the microphone? Yeah, thank you. It might not be on either.
That would help, thank you. When you created the tiers, were they based on exclusively the program participation or the dollar income of the recipients? In other words, is the proposal to place customers into tiers based on their participation, say, in temporary family assistance or SNAP, or based on what the total household income is of that family?
It could be either. If we're receiving a file from DSS and coding our accounts that way, it's based on the DSS benefit. If a customer self-declares and submits financial backup to what their income is, we could then put that customer in that tier based on what percentage their income falls in.
And because my concern is that the different tiers, they are maximum eligibility as opposed to actual household income. So for example, a household that receives SNAP could have the same income as that household that is eligible for temporary family assistance. It doesn't mean that their income is up to 211% of the federal poverty level. It just means that they don't get, for example, temporary family assistance because there are other eligibility factors. for example, this family maybe doesn't have children or receive temporary family assistance, which is a short-term program. So it is of concern that people of very low income who would otherwise be eligible for those tier 5 programs would not be able to participate in that appropriate discount just because they get SNAP or just because they get Husky A. I mean, again, for example, Husky A parents, the income eligibility is much tighter than for children because the state wants to include more children in their insurance programming. But it doesn't mean that that household receives up to 211% of the federal poverty level. So I think there's a real concern around doing it exclusively based on the tiers because those households don't necessarily receive between 161 and 211% of the federal poverty level. So I guess the question is how are we going to remedy that?
I mean, again, it would have to be a discussion between us, Eversource, DSS, everyone to come up with a good plan as to how we move forward. But a customer that may come to us in some way, let's say through a DSS file, and they had qualified for tier 2 because they received SNAP. Doesn't mean they can't then upgrade to a tier 4 or a tier 5 based on other qualifications that they could submit to us. So they're not limited and tied to that tier. They can always be upgraded based on additional information.
And I think that's a really important component that we have to figure out and how to communicate that, how to put it in the training.
Right, yes.
Because it is, it really should be based on total household income, not on, I mean, it is a place to start perhaps if they are eligible for these DSS programs. But again, it doesn't necessarily mean that their income
Right.
is up to, because these are eligibility guidelines. These are the top
Mhm.
standards. We have many households that have very little in the way of income.
Right, yes.
The
And-
household income, we feel is key for both the things, for income, for lower income, as well as, higher income, because there could be a person, and this is the part where we thought there was some issues with the DSS information we received is just because someone in the household is getting, say, Husky, and it's adult child that happens to be living at home, does not mean that that household household income qualifies for any program because their income is much higher than, but their adult child happens to be living at home right now. So it's important.
That's not necessarily as we see that program, but I appreciate that's your position.
Well, that's what we see. I mean, those are some examples that we've seen, and we've had customers call us that were put on the discount and called us and said, didn't even realize that there was someone in their household getting a program and said, no, I don't qualify for this. I make too much money. I should not be on this program.
I think that the key is the communication
Mhm,
to the
absolutely.
customers as to whether or not, rather than being pigeonholed into one tier or
Yes.
another, and how are we going to tell them and what really productive methods of communication are we going to use so that customers are aware that they're not punished between, tier
Right.
5 and tier 3 simply because they receive SNAP when their income is very low.
Yes, and our enrollment letters do state that this is how you could upgrade if you feel you qualify for a larger discount. And we can modify those depending on where we go with this.
Right, and I think key is letting perhaps, sharing that information with DSS, with their workers on their website, with the CAAs and all the other agencies that qualify low-income customers for these programs.
Yes.
Thank you. I don't
We
have
agree.
any other questions.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Vice Chairman, do you have any questions? Okay. Just one clarifying question from me about the supplements that we had earlier. I know we clarified the one I think we need Mr. Marini's help on. Just want to make sure that we also captured the extra 30,000 customers that that we had the discussion about earlier. When you supplement LFE 27, are you able to indicate what proportion of those 30,000 customers were in tier 1 versus tier 2? Does that make sense?
Can we?
Can you? Thank you. Okay. That's it from me. Attorney Sutter, do you need a moment to consider redirect?
No, no redirect necessary.
Okay, very good. Then thank you to the witnesses. You're excused, and we will shuffle to our next panel from Eversource, please. Morning, Attorney O'Hare. I believe your witnesses are both sworn. Okay, then when you're all ready, we can adopt the pre-filed material, please.
Your full name and title for record.
Yep, my name is Daniel Trainer. I'm the Director of Credit and Collections for Eversource. Yes, I did.
As your sworn testimony, the responses to the file exhibits filed by Bruce Washington, Ernesto Lizama, and Helen Yang.
Yes, I do.
Do you have any modifications at this time?
I do not.
Do you adopt these materials as your sworn testimony?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Any direct? Attorney O'Hare, any direct? Okay, thank you. Then we'll begin with cross-examination from authority staff. Ms. Vigrass, please.
Morning. Thank you for joining us today. So first, we'll start with late file exhibit 27, the revised version which the company provided yesterday. Could the company walk us through the updated filing and specifically discuss what differences exist between this filing and the original?
Yes, so the updated filing from yesterday took into account the information that the Department of Social Services provided earlier in the week on how the customers, our customers were split between tiers 1 through 5. So we then took that information, percentagized it, and applied that to the approximately 200,000 customers we have currently on LIDR to determine how many customers would fit into each of the 5 tiers.
Okay, thank you for that detail. So, my understanding from what you just said is that you essentially use the percentage of Eversource customers per DSS tier and use that to estimate the number of current financial hardship customers, how they might be broken out per tier, if there were a 3, 4, or 5 tier structure in the future. Is
That's
that
correct.
correct? Okay.
Yeah, and additionally, so DSS didn't have all of our customers, about a quarter of the customers currently on the LIDR. DSS didn't have information on, they come either through the CAAs or directly to Eversource to provide their information. So those we basically split the same way that DSS provided us, those same percentages.
Okay, thank you. And do you know the quarter of those customers, do you know specifically that the reason they weren't included in DSS data sharing is because they were enrolled in through the CAAs, or they came directly to the company to enroll?
Yeah, likely those are the two main ways the customers that are not on the DSS list can come in and get verified as hardship and enter into the LIDR.
Okay, thank you. And so for the tier 4 structure that aligns with SEEP level 1, does the company have an estimate of how many customers might be eligible for tier 4? And did you include that in this analysis?
Good question, and we went through that yesterday. So in our late supplemental response to LFE 27, in the footnote, what we captured there is, so yes, DSS does not have the SEEP information, but we know from the community action agencies that there were about 11,000 customers who received SEEP level 1 assistance. And that was similar to what our Avangrid partner said. It's looking at the amount they got last year. It was either that $530 or the $480. Those 11,000 customers, the reason we didn't map it in here, there will be an overlap, but we don't know where, and nor does DSS. DSS has given us aggregated data. They haven't given us customer-specific data. If all 11,000 were incremental, which they're not, but if they were all incremental at the tier 4, in the tier 4, getting that 40% discount, that's less than $9 million is what we'd calculate. We didn't put that in here yet. We knew we had time to talk that through today. But most of those customers, we believe, would either be in the tier 1, 2, 3, or 5 already. So it's probably significantly less than that $9 million. But DSS does not know that, and nor do we. The next step when DSS gives us like the actual file of all of our specific customers, then we can compare and figure out which ones are overlap, but it feels small at this point as far as the overall decision on what the structure should be. That's helpful.
Great, thank you. And can you explain a little bit further what you mean by those SEEP level 1 customers are probably already captured within 1, 2, 3, or 5?
Yeah, so on that, so since we have about 200,000 customers on LIDR and DSS provided information for about 150,000, so using that same percentage, about 75% of the customers DSS already knows about, right? So if you apply that 75% to that 11,000, 75% of that we're expecting to be somewhere in tiers 1, 2, 3, or 5. So if you're in one of the lower tiers, you'd shift up to a tier 4. And if you're in the tier 5, you wouldn't go back to the tier 4. So
Right.
there would just be shifting for most of those customers, and then possibly maybe a couple thousand incremental to the numbers there.
Okay, thank you. And so with the tier 5 assumption, the assumption is that they might be receiving level 1 of SEEP, but their income actually makes them eligible for tier 5. Is that the
That's
assumption?
correct. So they would be by that in tier 5. They wouldn't go back down to tier 4 since SEEP level 1 is the highest SEEP level you can get, and likely many of those customers are in tier 5. Would be
Okay,
in tier.
right. Thank you. So the company has estimated that there are 11,000 customers that might be eligible for or might have received SEEP level 1. So what I'm hearing is that the actual amount of customers that might be on tier 4 that would be eligible for that would likely be less than the 11,000.
That's
Is that correct? Okay.
If you took that back of the envelope on 3/4 of them being in DSS, then it would be 3/4 of the 1/4 of the 11,000, so a few thousand. So if 1/4 of the 9 million would be 2 million incremental. But that said, with that next slice from DSS, we'll know exactly. And it's not an estimate of the 11,000, it is 11,000. It's
Okay.
based on last winter's SEEP receipt. Those are actuals, and it's in footnote 2 on that response.
Okay, great, thank you. And do you have an understanding of when DSS will be able to provide that kind of next level detail?
That's not a step that we've discussed at this point,
Mhm.
to determine, when we would get account level detail.
Sure,
Because at this point,
right.
we don't know how many tiers or anything like that, so.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So I just wanted to confirm, so within the analysis that the company provided in the revised late file exhibit 27 filing, are all financial hardship customers reflected in this analysis?
That's correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then, so the analyses that were included in LFE 27, did that take into account the usage cap?
Yes, it did.
Can you explain how it did that?
Yep. So what we did, so the way we do it in the spreadsheets that we filed is you calculate it before, what's the cost before the usage cap, and then we reduce it by 17%, which is what we calculated based on a year's worth of usage, looking at customers and how much of the actual usage is above that cap. So for non-heating customers, how much of their usage on an annual basis was above that cap, and then heating customers above that 1,200 kilowatt hour cap. So it ends up being about 17% of their total usage ends up above the cap and ultimately undiscounted.
Okay, sure.
And if I could supplement that, so that is a back of the envelope, knowing to not discount it by usage would overstate it, but that was based on 2020 usage cap data, so it's just a snapshot in time. If you base it on this year, there'd be a lot more usage from June, July that'd be over that cap, for example. But that will vary every year, so we thought it was important, probably similarly for Avangrid, just that point in time, so it doesn't overstate the costs. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. So my understanding from from the company's filing was that the 17% was the percentage of the company's customers that are financial hardship customers. Is that correct? Or
Coincidentally,
okay,
I think it's coincidental that the
Right.
numbers are the same, but that number sounds.
Yeah, it's right around there.
higher. It's right around there, yeah.
Okay.
17, 18, yeah.
okay, great, thank you. So, similar to with Avangrid, given that the DSS recommended kind of eligibility benefit for tier 4 of the discount rate is SEEP, which DSS does not include in data sharing. Did the company consider a different benefit program or income guideline for tier 4?
I think at this point, we were very excited that DSS had made the recommendation. And at the same time, we were surprised when it came back with no data in it. And then in hindsight, maybe that made sense because they have been sharing that they don't get the SEEP data. Our prior proposals had put different household income guidelines, but we didn't know where customers split. So DSS was going to have it best. We kind of like, and we debated, there's no perfect answer, but what we like about having SEEP level 1 be its own tier is it further encourages customers to get SEEP. It's like a double benefit. 1, they get SEEP, and 2, they'd get the deeper discount. And then they can also, like Ms. Roswick was sharing, they can also provide household income and qualify for the tier 4, even if they don't participate in any of the other programs that DSS matches with the tier 1, 2, 3, and 5.
Thank you. So going off of that, does the company have a position on whether using SEEP level 1 as the kind of qualifying benefit is kind of the most efficient or most appropriate benefit for tier 4?
I'm going to defer to DSS because, and even with Ms. Roswick's questions earlier, they know it better than we do, the state programs and assistance. What we do like about having the 5-tier is with the bookends of the 10% and 50%, that it creates a steady ladder instead of a cliff. So when there's small variations in income, it's dramatic to go from a 50% to a 10%, but stepping down is preferable. And I think in the years ahead, maybe that could adjust. It seems odd that there aren't more programs at the state level in that tier area. But then also we'll be able to learn, are most of those customers getting SEEP level 2 or level 1? Are they already in tier 5? Which they might be, we just won't know yet.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So now moving to late file exhibit 37. I know that this response was looking at the cost and timeline to adjust how you might drop a customer from financial hardship designation based on the data sharing file received from DSS. And the company provided a proposal on what that might look like, but there was no accompanying estimated time or cost for that proposal. Can the company provide that here?
We cannot provide it here, but if that was, if that grace period, for example, is similar to what we do in Massachusetts, which is, once we stop receiving a certain customer from DSS in the monthly file, then that would be the lack of receiving them as a yes, lack of affirmative confirmation from DSS that they get assistance, that would be the trigger to give them 60 days notice. So we propose 60 days. I think that's consistent with the notification we're giving them on rolling hardship. But basically it would then give them, the 12 months plus 2 additional months on the discount rate. So if that's what what the proposal is, then that piece we can go back to IT and estimate. And it's unique to just the DSS data matched customers. If they provided household income directly to us or through community action agencies, that process stays as designed. It's only for the DSS ones because we really don't know when they started their benefits and we don't know when they end. So we can take that as I don't know where we are in the process, supplemental or late file or
Supplement.
supplemental. Okay. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. And so that would be a supplement to late file exhibit 37.
Great.
Thank you. And going off of that, does the company know if there are any DSS programs that are time limited, as in a customer can only participate for a certain amount of time, but are not allowed to extend, but are technically still eligible?
I did the visual phone a friend, and Ms. Roswick is nodding. Many of the programs at DSS are time limited. Some go 18 months, some go less, some go more. I think the TAMP, that temporary assistance, and there'll be other ones too, but yep, I know Bonnie's nodding on that one. So Ms. Roswick is nodding on that one. So yes, some are more or less than 12 months. But right now, if we're receiving them from DSS, they might be in their 13th, 14th month on an 18-month program, but we're still going to treat them as financial hardship and keep them on the discount rate.
Okay.
Even though it's beyond 12 months from when they originally verified.
Right. All right. Thank you. And my last question. So late file exhibit 39 talked about customers that were added to and removed from the financial hardship list from DSS data sharing. Can you describe why customers were removed from the list between May and July?
So the list that we're referring to in LFE 39 is the DSS list. So customers, we just took the DSS list. It doesn't mean that customers fell off of the LIDR. It's just DSS sent us a list in May, DSS sent us a list in July. How many customers fell off of that list from DSS? And as Ms. Kane was saying, customers can fall off at any time from a program on DSS. So that was the 11,104 was the number of customers that fallen off from May to July. Of a
None
DSS
has fallen
program.
off the discount rate
Yeah.
with
Right.
us yet. It hasn't been a
Yeah.
year.
Okay.
Yeah, so
thank
those
you.
customers are still on the LIDR. They're just at that point in time in July weren't receiving a benefit that they were receiving in May.
Right. Okay. I appreciate that. So the customers that were added to the DSS list, were they added to the discount rate?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you so much. Those are all of my questions.
Thank you. Okay, moving right along, OCC, please.
Good morning, Kim White with OCC. So I'm going to begin with LFE, the LFE 27, the revision that you submitted yesterday. And I just have a couple of quick questions about that. So for the purposes of my questions, generally, I'm in the tab that's labeled 5 tiers parentheses DSS. So similar questions to what I was asking UI. I just want to make sure that I understand that the way the spreadsheet works. In row 10, I'm just going to go to cell F10 for the minute. You know, in any of those cells in row 10, if I enter into a different number, a different percentage in F10, then that goes through the rest of the sheet and updates the entire rest of the sheet, correct?
That's correct.
So I can use your sheet to alter the numbers. Okay. In row 6, the all-in rate, is that the most recent all-in rate, or did you update that?
That's from early 2024, first half of 2024.
So we have not updated that one in the last few versions.
And in row 18, cell D18, the bill, the average monthly bill pre-discount, it looks to me like you calculated that by multiplying the all-in rate times 750 kilowatt hours. I know there's no formula in here, but when I multiply those, I get an extremely similar number.
We can help on that one. So that one, it's not a calculation. That is that's just residential customers only. And it's from that point in time last winter, we had just asked them to give us their calculation of the average residential monthly bill pre-discount versus the top numbers that include total billed sales and all in. Those numbers we added only to be able to back into that New York assessment of what's the total billed sales. So that number includes like all the CNI customers as well. If that helps.
Okay. And when we were having some discussions with UI earlier about the difference in the number of customers that you used in here versus the number on the DSS files. Well, one of the things that Avangrid had stated was that, you know, there was a presumption and really no way to know exactly how many, that some of those customers did drop off. Do you think, does that capture any of yours, or you don't think it does?
When you say drop off the DSS.
So my understand, I'm restating what Avangrid said, which is always dangerous territory, but my understanding of what they testified to was that, and we had a bit of a discussion about this, was that some number, you know, the reason for the difference in the files is that they had customers identified that weren't on DSS services anymore, that they had customers identified in their system as financial hardship that weren't receiving DSS services anymore. And that's probably why they didn't show up in the DSS numbers. Do you think there's some number of those that, but based on what you had, the discussion with Ms. Fibrass earlier, that you're showing some people dropped off, I'm
Yeah.
assuming?
Yep. Yeah, there'll be customers that dropped off. For example, that 11,000 would not be in the DSS latest run unless they had gotten services from DSS from July to August.
Okay.
And then Kim, of the Ms. White, of the total 200,000 financial hardship verified customers, 150,000 of them are exclusively through the DSS match. 50,000 are not through the DSS match and not represented in the DSS match. So it's just household income to our community action agencies or us. And it is an interesting number because it's a quarter of the customers DSS does not have.
When you say household income to a community action agency, do you know if that means that it's SEEP, that they're applying for SEEP, or you don't know? You just know that they give their household income to the community action agency in some form?
It's meeting with the community action agency, then the number who get SEEP is less than the 50,000. I think the number who get SEEP is less than the quantity that go to a community action agency, right? So, or get verified as financial hardship through a community action agency. So there's a delta there, which is interesting as well.
Okay. And then on top of that, there's some number that comes straight to you that don't go to a community
Correct.
action agency.
Yep. The ones that can, in recent years, we now directly receive through secure document upload, fax, or USPS mail, household income documentation.
In your IT system, so let's say a customer came to you in the first instance themselves, if they went to either a CAA and got SEEP or a DSS at some point at a later time, does your system then recognize, wait, we see this person through DSS now and we don't see them just through ourselves anymore? Does that question make sense?
The source that.
Yeah, if we know, if the customer comes in through DSS and they get a different tier, we would update that. But if there's no update needed, if they're on the same tier, there wouldn't be anything to process in the system per se.
So with your backend system, I guess what I'm really trying to get at is how many, do we have any sense of the number of customers, they might come initially to you on their own, but then they might, you're just the first step in their process of getting multiple benefits. So then they go to DSS or they go get SEEP or they go get something else afterwards. Does anything in your system trigger you to know that now there's a duplication in that? Or do you just see them initially? You've already processed them and they didn't change their tier, so from your perspective, they're still in the same category.
I don't think we'll necessarily see that. And there's nothing in the system that'll say that, but we did see some of that when we first put everybody on LIDR, where there was people that the only way to get on hardship at that point was to either send us information or to go to a CAA or DSS opt-in from a couple of Decembers ago. But there was overlap, right? DSS sent us a list and 20, 30,000 customers were already on that list. So we knew some of those customers were already getting benefits, but now that everything's kind of in the system and running, we're not going to see, and we don't have anything to track that says this person now went and did something different because they got on LIDR.
Good morning, Tom Wheel, the Office of Consumer Counsel. My first question is about LFE 27, the original, the old school one from August 5th. And it's the narrative response to the third, number 3 here, which addresses the question of the administrative costs. As of August 5th, it looks like the company is saying that there hasn't been a change to the estimate of $40,000 over an 8 to 10 week frame. Is that correct?
Correct.
And is that the same regardless of the number of tiers, like which option?
Correct. Well, as long as it's not above 5.
Okay.
We built 5
And is that $40,000 total or per additional tier?
total.
Thanks. And has that number changed at all since the newer data received from DSS since August 5th?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. LFE 35. So this was just asking for a proposal for what the question calls the interim period, sort of the gaps between where we are and where we're going. And the first response recommends, proposes sticking with the current two-tiered state until IT changes are finalized. I was just curious if you would elaborate on that proposal as to whether you mean the two-tiered LiDAR sort of as envisioned from the original final decision, or whether you mean two tiers with the current kind of stay as to auto enrollment for tier 2.
I'm going to try to answer that. The current 2 tiers that we have, there are only 2 places that we can put customers in. It's just one of those 2 tiers. So there's no other interims. We can't put them in anything in the interim. So we think we should do this 8 to 10 week effort. And then even if DSS isn't ready to use the 5 tiers, just in the interim, until they can start sending us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in the file they already send us. In the interim, we would just do the processes we do today, which is pretend we didn't have DSS data matching, and we would go through CAA and submit household income directly to us to put them in the 5 tiers.
Okay. And for right now, there are, as I think we've discussed probably in the earlier hearing, there are customers who are eligible for tier 2 but aren't receiving the 50% discount subject to the pause placed on the program, right? And are those customers, I guess for the record, yes, with you.
Oh, yes.
Thanks. And those customers, are they in your IT system? They're in tier 2. They're just a pause.
No, all the new customers that come through all the customers that come through the DSS list are enrolled in tier 1, and then they get information on how to upgrade to tier 2, regardless of if DSS currently says they're tier 2.
Okay.
And so, Mr. Wheel, where you might be going as far as a transition, once the 5 tiers are built, I think that there should be a step to just parse to move those customers up to their respective tier in like a one-time move up, but move nobody down. That's we can't rescind what we've committed to customers. So within that year, that first year that they've been on that discount rate.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and that was what I was going in, I guess, even more, sort of the question I started with, but just, I'll ask it again, just for clarification. Until those 5 tiers are developed, is the plan to just stay with the system that's in place now, where the majority of customers are on tier 1, regardless of how DSS has identified them, and the only transition would be to move from the current system into the 5-tier system. Is that correct?
I would say yes.
Okay, thank you. LFE 38. And this kind of gets, I think, into what you were just talking about, Ms. Kane. I don't know how relevant it is because I'll confirm after I ask my question. It sounds like from this response, there isn't a way, I just want to make sure I understand. It sounds like there isn't a technological way to continue to give the customers who are currently getting the tier 2 level 50% discount, that same discount, if there isn't a tier in the system that provides a 50% discount. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. But that's, just to confirm, probably not relevant, I should say, because at least according to the company's proposals, because looking at LFE set 27, it doesn't look like any of the suggestions don't include a 50% tier. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, I'll help. There have been a lot of versions of the low-income discount rate and scenario analysis, and the guidance that we received for what was it, Dan? On the keeping the bookends. Oh, CAE 49. So we kept the guidance from that question in CA 49 was to keep the bookends at 10% and 50% and only provide options in the middle. In our July response, we added an option that would give that 75%, but that we stuck with the guidance that Pura had given us to use those as bookends, which I think probably given this summer's activity and customer sentiment, probably 50% might have a new different value than we might have all thought 5 or 6 months ago.
Thanks. And by that, do you mean now that bills are higher, 50% represents a greater overall cost for the program?
Both that and I'm sensitive to the concerns from customers about the cost to pay for the discount rate and whether it would cause outrage for some customers to be getting a 75% discount. So it's just, there's a caution moment. Or we just don't want to be tone deaf to that. So both sides of the equation.
Thanks. LFE 39, I actually asked you some questions in the original hearing about the proposed process for the grace period, the process for removing someone from the discount after they've fallen off of the DSS list. I was just hoping now that we have LFE 39 and there are sort of these 11,000 customers who were removed in July, I just want to make sure I understand. I think I understood it from last time, but now that there's sort of like an actual time frame, can you just walk me through again, like what's going to happen to those 11,000 customers in terms of like the timing of the steps and the grace period, et cetera?
Yeah, so the current process is you're on the LIDR for a year, 12 months. Once your 12 months expires or really several months before your 12 months expire, you get notifications that, hey, your discount's going to be expiring in 60 days and 30 days and 15 days, and then it's expired. So those customers that are no longer on the DSS list, assuming they're no longer on the DSS list 3 months before expiration, they will receive that series of letters. And then ultimately, if they don't provide us with information or don't receive DSS benefits at that time, they'll be removed from the discount.
Okay, so these 11,000 customers who were removed in July, they're still going to receive the nothing happens until their 1 year is up.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay. And when is that, does it vary by I guess I'm at, in this circumstance, because the rate was just activated generally pretty recently, are all of these customers going to have a similar experience in terms of when the rate expires for them?
For this particular set of 11,000 customers, it's likely in May, many of them will expire, but many of them could have also already been on the discount prior to that time, since this is just a comparison of the DSS list itself and not necessarily that they were placed on in the month of May.
Okay.
So they could have varying expiration dates, but we do have a large number of customers that will expire May 2025.
Okay.
If nothing is acted upon by those customers or they're not on the DSS list at that time.
Thanks. And I don't, when the company developed the new LFE 27, was there any accounting for, like, is there any projection for for customers who may fall off of the program over time in terms of calculating the overall program costs?
No, when we use the 200,000, we think that's pretty close to our steady state number of customers. And in the first year, we're going to see that kind of increase until we have customers start to fall off and not renew. So without any historical information, we kind of stuck with that 200,000 number as a good estimate on what a steady state time period looks like.
Okay. Thanks. Do you think it would make sense moving forward theoretically over some amount of time if they're to begin accounting for that for fall off, if there's sort of data suggesting, I guess I'll back up a little. The company can't know right now what's going to happen to even these 11,000 customers, correct? Because there's a lot of time between now and when even the removal process starts, and the process is sort of designed to ensure that some customers don't fall off. Is that correct?
Yes, so 3 months before expiration, we'll look at the DSS list and see if you're on the DSS list. If you're on the DSS list, you'll get another 12 months added to the, from that date. Where no action is needed from the customer, and they won't receive any of that series of letters I was referring to. So assuming they're consistently getting DSS benefits, then they'll stay on the LIDR with no action needed from their side.
And Mr. Will, I think where you're going on LFE 39, if, for example, in that May, July period, if there was plus 10,000 minus 11,000, there'll be puts and takes every month. But with the rolling financial hardship, we're thinking it's going to be pretty steady, barring all, all big global type of experiences, and that would keep it steady state for rolling on and off, which will flatten it.
Understood.
But you're right, we won't know exactly how many there will be.
Okay. Thanks. Want to double check before I commit. I think this is my last set of questions about LFE 40. So this says that of the 196,000 customers on the LiDAR, 586 had their services terminated for non-payment. Did any tier 2 customers get a termination, or is this capturing all the total terminations for all of LiDAR, or just tier 1?
That's just tier 1. The request was specifically tier 1.
Do you know if tier 2 customers have also been terminated?
I would imagine so, yes.
Okay. Do you know the total number of those 196,000 customers who received termination notices?
I don't have that number offhand, but likely it's in the Pura data dashboard.
Okay. Do you have just a general sense of like what the scope of the total number of people who received notices as compared to the total number who were terminated was? And I'll say why I'm asking. I'm interested in how it compares to the non-LiDAR data. In other words, let's say it's 5% of people who receive notices ultimately become terminated who are in the LiDAR program. I'm just curious if there's a noticeable difference yet between that kind of ratio versus overall termination rate data.
Mr. Will, we can provide that because tee it up where it is. What we've seen is, I think it's 95% of the customers that DSS sent us as low income do not have a past due balance. So the vast majority of our low income customers don't have a past due balance. Of those who have a past due balance, I believe there was an interrogatory from CCA where we said, here's how many would be eligible, meaning they have a past due balance that's old enough and large enough, would they be eligible to receive a disconnect notice? And that, was that on the other docket? Okay, that was on the energy affordability docket that we submitted it, but maybe we can find it, maybe? But generally, we see the same response rates. It's approximately 80% of customers who receive a disconnect notice who have not already taken action to sign up for a payment plan or make payment, will sign up for a payment plan and make payment. And then further, after customers are disconnected, it's similarly like 70 to 80% who will then take action to make payment to get reconnected. We haven't seen those numbers change in the other 2 states. It's a little early in Connecticut, but typically it's more the behavior isn't different and not significantly different versus low income versus non, but we can it's a good question, and I don't know if we've sliced it that way in Connecticut in the last few months.
Thanks. That's exactly what I was looking for, which is sort of a general sense. And I think that's our last question for this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Nigro? Thank you. Attorney Wyman? Thank you. Attorney Roswick?
Good morning again, Bonnie Rosser from the Center for Children's Advocacy. So of those 11,000 people that were removed, or in general, customers who were removed, are they customers who receive SEEP?
We should clarify, nobody was removed from the discount rate?
Or who
Okay.
received notice that they were,
So that on LFE, that's a 39. The question was to compare the DSS list against the DSS list. So it doesn't have any customer impact. No customer was removed, received notification. The customers had no idea that this was being done. DSS sent us a list, DSS sent us another list, and it was who was on the first list, that's on the second list, and who was on one list and who wasn't on the other list. So that was the 11,000 customers who were on the first list, but not on the second list, purely information from DSS.
so when in fact that happens, and there are customers who are no longer on the list. So first of all, are these customers, they're removed from the LIDR?
Nope.
I mean, once you go through all the notification process, I appreciate all that. Are they, then when time has passed, they've gotten their notifications, are they removed from hardship?
So, you want to see it?
Yeah. So we implemented rolling hardship earlier in the year, which ties their hardship dates to their LIDR dates. So if you're hardship, you're automatically LIDR. So yes, at that point in time, if they're receiving these expiration letters, that also is because we didn't have any information that they're currently hardship.
And I'll inject that none of these customers are close to that because they just got signed up for the LIDR, which they're on for 12 months. So nothing negative happened with these customers at all. It's just a comparison of the DSS list. If we follow the current process, that's what Dan was speaking to earlier, which would be that 3 months prior to the 12 months they were on it, we would start sending them a notification to say you need to recertify if they're not on it. If they are still on the DSS list, then we keep them on it for another year. So okay.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It is, I am concerned about a process that sort of, all of these people should have always been enrolled in hardship. All these people should have always had access or participated in the low-income programs because they were income eligible, which is one of the reasons that we came to data sharing in the first place. But I guess my question is, once they are gone through this process, you haven't heard from them, or before you start this process, are you checking to see whether these people are receiving SEEP?
Yes, if they receive SEEP, then they're automatically coded as receiving SEEP and they'll get the year benefit there.
So regardless of whether or not the DSS
Yeah.
Data, okay, that's great. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Let's see. Commissioner Karen.
Very quick question. This morning, you been talking a lot about DSS and CAP agencies and how they play into this process. I'm just curious, is your relationship, I should ask you the same thing, with DSS and CAP agencies? Are they cooperating? Are you meeting with them on a regular basis? Is there some kind of reporting mechanism, or How's it going? Because I know how those state agencies can be, right?
Good question. I think Peter Hadler's fantastic to work with, and we're gonna take that sheet that he's given that maps programs to tiers, and we've already talked to the key stakeholders in the regulatory process in Massachusetts, because that's what they need there. We're redesigning from one discount rate to tiered there as well. And we're also recommended 5 tiers, but it was definitely OCC's Ms. Coleman who got DSS on board to do the data, to build what needed to be built in recent years. So we couldn't have done that without that partnership as well. And we continue to spray gratitude towards DSS, because we know this is not their day job, but it is really helping customers. So that's very positive. And the community action agencies, well, there's no issues there, and we
Great.
work well with them. Thank you.
Good, very encouraging. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a little bit of a confirmation question based on some questions that I think you're engaged in with Attorney Wheel. So I think I understood that the interim period, the proposal will be to maintain status quo, correct?
Until we can, if we got approval to implement the 5 tiers, it would be the interim period until we can implement that. Yep.
Right, thank you. And recognizing that the interim period for Eversource would hopefully not be as long, I still want to explore a follow-up question, because I think we identified a second interim period potentially of how long it might take DSS to process the system changes necessary to do the automatic data sharing for the additional tiers. So during that time period, not knowing if it's going to be a couple months, the only other way I think my staff and I could think of like what you would do in the interim is maybe take your existing tiers of the 10 and 50 and assuming 50 remained an option in the 5 tiers that are approved, change the eligibility requirement for the 50% to match what the eligibility requirement will be in the new ones, to try to like minimize customer confusion or changes. Recognizing that may be vastly overthinking it at this stage, kind of wondering if you've thought through that.
We had not thought of that. So the transition plan, we need a transition plan, and we wouldn't want to put new people in it imminently, like right before the eligibility criteria changes. But even if we did, we'd keep them at that 50%. So, but a transition plan is needed with the customer communication. Most is actually all should be positive or not worse news. But yes, that is a good question. And then we'd have to train the community action agencies and our internal folks on how we intake the household income for that tier 2 in the interim.
Do you have any sense? I think maybe Ms. Vigrass asked Avangard a question that led into this earlier, kind of asking, is it easy or simple to change the eligibility requirement in the system?
I think it's the eligibility criteria is actually not in the system. So for that reason, it's easier. So we train the community action agencies. The only place that it's system automated is in the DSS feed. So in the DSS feed, we're keeping them in the tier 1. So then it's just training the community action agencies and our own folks on what the eligibility would be for current tier 2, the current 50%.
Okay, so in my mind, the pro of having an interim period that aligned the 50% with the new eligibility requirement would be less disruption to new customers being enrolled. The con, I guess, might be you have to retrain folks sooner or faster. And I guess you could no longer use the 50% data matching you're getting from DSS, which we're not really doing right now anyway. So like, I know I'm kind of asking you issue spot in real time, but am I thinking about this the right way? Are you seeing any obvious holes?
I think you're thinking about it the right way. I think ideally, with approval, we definitely want to have a bias fraction for getting those 5 out. Is it worth it to retrain all the CAAs and our own folks on lower eligibility criteria, or just leave it as is and allow customers to get into that 50% and they'd stay on it for a year? Once you're in it, you stay on it for a year anyway. So it's and we do have a lot of training going on to the CAAs about new MPP and ending New Start.
And it would be
That-
training twice in a
Right.
short period of time.
Yeah.
Like you'd have to train them, all right, here's the new criteria for tier 2, and then a couple months later, it's now here's the criteria for tier 2, 3, 4, and 5.
So does that weigh in your mind against the short-term change and just maintaining the status quo for the transition period?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. I don't have any further questions. Attorney O'Hara, do you need a moment to consider redirect?
Supplement?
When is the timing of, because they usually need at least 2 weeks. They usually take more than that, but I don't know the timing. What I'd like to find out is it bigger than a bread box? Is it something, is this, versus that piece of it? I think it feels like something that's not very large on that estimate for what we're talking about is the DSS, when they fall off the annual or follow off the DSS list, what would it take for IT to build that estimation? Yeah. Is a few weeks too long from the proceeding? I don't know where we are.
Briefs are due September 30th. I think I'd asked Avangrid by Wednesday, and it sounds like that's not feasible for the specific supplement you're asking for. So I think I would just ask that you file it as soon as it's available.
Okay.
Please.
Yep.
Any other administrative matters? Okay. Then as mentioned, briefs are due September 30th. Thank you to the witnesses. I think that brings us to the end of our agenda. I'm not seeing any other hands or anything for administrative matters. So I thank everyone for your participation today and throughout the proceeding, and I believe we are adjourned.